Thank you very much. I want to thank Senator Langford for that introduction. I'm honored to serve with him as well. And again, the state did a great favor to our country by sending him to serve. He replaced a great friend of mine in Tom Coburn, who we miss, but you couldn't have a better replacement, someone who I'm very proud to work with and who I think has a bright future, both in American politics and whatever he endeavors to do in his life, and has already done a great job in the most important job he'll ever have, which is that of a husband and a father. And it's important to remind ourselves of that, because sometimes when we enter public service, we forget that the most important and biggest difference we'll ever make won't be in the Capitol, but in the hearts and minds and lives of the people that we live with. And he's a great example of that. And so I'm grateful for those kind words and honored to be able to serve alongside him in the United States Senate. And I want to thank all of you for the chance to speak to you today about this issue of energy and the future of our country. I don't speak about it just because I'm here with you today. It is, in fact, part of the regular message that I use across this country. The belief that energy independence, energy innovation, is one of the most transformative developments that America has ever seen in its history. If properly harnessed, will be a critical aspect of ushering in the most prosperous era in the history of our country. I want to spend most of the time today taking your questions, but I wanted to begin with a few short remarks. As many of you know, I've based my campaign on this for president on the question of how we can make the 21st century a new American century, as it says on our banner here. And the topic we're here to discuss is a crucial component of that, my plan to achieve that goal. The energy industry is really crucial to and central to our future in every single way, in terms of economic growth, in terms of financial security of our families, in terms of the strength of this nation as a global leader. The fortunate truth is that America has been uniquely blessed with energy resources that are more than we realized we had even 10 years ago. There are multiple nations on Earth with a great deal of oil and natural gas. There are multiple nations with access to important oceanic and hydroelectric resources. There are multiple nations with lush forests and tillable land. But there is no nation that has all of these things at the same time and to the same extent as the United States of America does. The fact that we have the greatest energy potential of any nation on the planet is an enormous advantage for us in this new century. It's hard to think of a single industry that has more direct impact on the financial well-being of everyday Americans, that has more of an impact than the energy industry does. Our energy resources truly sustain our human resources. Our businesses need to be able to operate affordably and efficiently in order to create jobs and grow our economy. Our families need reasonable gas and electric bills in order to reach financial security. And working mothers and fathers need to be able to commute to work without breaking the bank. Yet, despite its importance, our outdated government continues to make energy one of the most politicized and regulated aspects of our entire economy. Washington continues to lean on this notion that handing out subsidies to favored companies while imposing new mandates and taxes on others is the way to seize on our energy potential. But this did not work in the years of yesterday. It isn't working today, and it will not work in the years to come. Many regulations are concerned with protecting the environment, and some of these are important. We all want clean air to breathe and clear water to drink and clean water to drink. We all want to preserve the natural beauty of our land. But while many of the environmental concerns influencing regulations are legitimate, some are quite frankly overblown. And as a result, we have a small but vocal minority, some with very highly paid lobbyists, who have successfully pushed for regulations that result in higher prices and fewer jobs for our people in exchange for minimal, if any, environmental benefits. Now, I know that the vast majority of Americans, both Democrats, Republicans, Independents, are all very reasonable when it comes to balancing ecology with the economy. And I believe it is conservatives, not liberals, who ultimately have the more sustainable and the most forward-looking agenda in this regard. This is because the true path to an economically and environmentally secure future is not through regulation, it is through innovation. And innovation comes from less government, not from more government. It is private innovators, not government officials, who are best suited to discover cleaner and cheaper and more efficient ways to access our resources. It is private innovators, not government officials, who are best suited to find affordable fuel alternatives or to continue to develop substitutes such as electric or battery-powered vehicles. America's energy future must be entrusted to our businesses and to our scientists, not to our bureaucrats. And finding ways to empower our energy producers to capture our energy potential must be and should be a priority for every single presidential candidate. Unfortunately, what we hear from Hillary Clinton are more of the same ideas from yesterday. And that's when she even speaks up on the issue at all. For the most part, she resorts to empty rhetoric that refuses to chart much of a course in either direction. This is no way to treat one of the most important issues of our time. I'll be rolling out a detailed plan this fall for fully capturing, the energy potential of America. But I wanted today to give you a short preview of what that plan will entail. One of the first things I will do as president is I will immediately lift the ban on crude oil exports. This ban is a perfect example of just how outdated Washington has become. President Nixon signed this law in the 1970s, during an era of scarcity, long before the economy was transformed by technology and globalization, long before the hydraulic fracturing and shale revolutions launched a new era for American energy. Lifting the crude oil export ban will be an immediate boon to our economy. It will create literally hundreds of thousands of jobs here in America, and it will promote growth across every industry. It will help make America a net energy exporter within a few years. It will strengthen our national security interests by stabilizing global energy markets and reducing the leverage of anti-American oil-rich governments. Here's another common sense step I will take as president. I will stop the EPA's Clean Power Plan, which, if enacted, would have a devastating impact on affordable energy, and it will do so in exchange for little, if any, environmental benefit. In fact, it would result in the closure of coal-fired power plants around the country. It would kill thousands of jobs. It would jeopardize the reliability of our national power grid, threatening power shortages and even blackouts. It would truly be one of the most expensive and costly regulations ever created. And yet Hillary Clinton has pledged to make defending and expanding it one of her top priorities. As president, I will immediately stop this massive regulation. And instead, I will pursue a sweeping overhaul of the regulatory system to make sure costs and benefits of new rules are accurately accounted for, and that localities, states, and industries can meet the timelines I set forward. The days of arbitrary, damaging rules, like the Clean Power Plan and the so-called waters of the U.S. mandate, they will come to an end if I am president. And that brings me to one final step that I wanted to preview with you today, which is the work I will do as president to empower states to regulate energy production within their own borders. In fact, Senator Lankford, your own home state senator, has been a bold leader on this issue. As he'll tell you, Washington is currently on a crusade to take control of energy production away from the states. For example, the Bureau of Land Management is pursuing new, duplicative restrictions on hydraulic fracturing. State and local governments are far better equipped than Washington is to oversee energy production while balancing it with environmental concerns. Not only that, but anyone and everyone running for president needs to understand a basic truth. The Constitution of the United States grants very specific powers to the federal government. And if something isn't on that list of enumerated powers, it falls under the purview of the states. So when I take an oath to uphold and to defend the Constitution of the United States, I intend to take that oath very seriously. And that will include allowing the states to control their own energy futures. Oklahoma is proof of the ability of states to achieve their own energy potential. It is now the fourth largest natural gas producer in the United States, and the entire energy industry led to $65 billion in gross state product in the year 2013, an industry that supports more than 465,000 jobs. That's a staggering 20% of the state's entire labor force. Oklahoma has been on the forefront of the shale revolution, which has helped turn America into the #1 oil and natural gas producer in the world. Nationally, lower energy costs driven by new technologies have already helped America become competitive, again, in sectors like manufacturing, which had begun to lag. This growth and revival can continue across all industries and it will continue if we unleash our energy potential, and it must continue if we want to make the 21st century an American century. So I thank you very much for the chance to talk to you about this today, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Senator Rubio, thank you for taking the time to come and address this energy plan. I thought I would start off the Q&A for us. You mentioned it very specifically in your speech that really regulatory overreach from new rules and regulations being passed down from the federal government is one of the major concerns, especially in this industry. Can you give us a little more clarification or your input on how you see, under your presidency, the regulatory approach being changed?
Well, first we have to, as many in the room do, regulations aren't just words in a book. They have a cost of compliance, a cost that's borne by our economy. And so what I propose is something called a regulatory budget, which would set a hard cap number of how much regulations from the federal level can cost our economy in any given year. Let me tell you an example of that. First of all, the number we would set would be significantly lower than what it is today. So that would immediately require a reduction in regulations in order to get under the regulatory cost. But let me give you an example. Over the last 2 weeks ago, the federal government in a 5-day period implemented $2 billion of new regulatory costs. The week before it was a slow week. They only imposed $200 million of new regulatory costs. So that is, in a 10-day period or in a 14-day period, $2.2 billion of additional regulatory costs on our economy. If we had a regulatory budget in place, they would have had to reduce $202 billion worth of regulatory costs to get under the cap. In essence, if you want $2 billion of regulations, you must cut $2 billion of regulations somewhere else. And what that will do is it will inject a cost-benefit analysis once again into this process. It will force these agencies not just to reduce regulations and not just prevent them from adding new regulations, but it will require them, when they do these regulations, to look at the benefits and the costs of every regulation they impose. And by the way, because of this restrictions, it will also shrink the size of the federal bureaucracy. Because the less regulations you have, the less regulators you need. And these are important steps in and of itself, not a silver bullet. There are other things we need to do to reinvigorate American industry, whether it's tax reform, we need to be globally competitive, whether it's higher education reform, because we need to equip our people with the skills they need for the 21st century. But I truly believe that one of the issues we don't talk enough about is regulations. Regulations imposed by bureaucrats whose names you do not even know unless you've had to deal with them, who are elected or accountable virtually to no one, and who make staggering decisions that have a dramatic impact on our economy without any sort of oversight or due process.
Thank you. Other questions?
Senator, during the either Reagan administration or Bush administration, there was a cost-benefit analysis was imposed at that point in time for regulations that passed by environmental agencies or any agency. Is that being ignored today, or was that just something that was an executive order that disappeared?
Yeah, my understanding, if you're alluding to the same thing I am, is that it was largely an executive order that may not have been re-upped, but more importantly, it is an operative. In essence, they're not undergoing it. When they make these, they always calculate a particular cost, but it doesn't lead to decision making. So without a regulatory budget in place or something that restricts it, they may know what the cost and the benefit are, but they don't care. They'll do it anyway. In essence, they're willing to trade what they concede as a small benefit in exchange for a massive cost. And the cost side of it, it's not restricted by anything. You can continue to add new regulations without having to reduce other ones to take it up. So I think that by having the only way you're really going to get a cost-benefit analysis to weigh in and make a difference is if you impose a cap on how much regulations can cost. Then they will be forced to take into account the benefits versus the costs, because for every dollar they raise in regulatory costs, they're going to have to get rid of a regulation somewhere else.
Hi, Senator.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
I heard you speak about subsidies, but I would like to know what you think and feel about percentage depletion allowance, which is not a subsidy, it is a provision, a tax provision for a depleting resource.
Yeah, and
what you think about that?
And I've never accepted it as a subsidy. I've made the argument that it is basically a tax strategy that's used by multiple industries. It's not specifically geared towards any. I think the concern that I have is in the rule, and I'm not against renewables. I would love the country to be the world's leader solar supplier and wind energy and so forth. I know you can't power a 21st century economy with wind and solar by itself. But I have no problem if people want to cool or heat their water with solar panels. In some places it works extremely well. But you can't build a 21st century power grid on those things. And the second argument I've made is that ultimately these industries must be self-sustaining. They must be able to sustain themselves in a competitive environment and in a marketplace. I believe many of them will gain market share, but through innovation as they become more innovative in their use. I don't think you do it by subsidizing industries or companies like Solyndra, for example, who took millions of dollars of federal aid and went bankrupt with your taxpayer money.
Other questions?
Thank you very much, Senator Rubio. Being from Oklahoma here, obviously, as you're here today, you are aware that we are an anchor to the oil industry. And, of course, I listened to your comments this morning about the Iran nuclear deal. It appears to be veto-proof in the Senate now. That's going to have a major economic impact on the oil industry, putting Iran allowing to put millions of barrels of oil. Is there any kind of physical impact study of which has been done by the Congress on how this is going to have a negative impact on states like Oklahoma, Texas, and those that are?
I doubt it. I doubt anyone's even thought about that carefully. It's beyond it. But I will say a couple points. If I'm president, that deal won't survive. It's not a treaty. It's not legally binding on the United States. It's a decision the president's made to use the national security waiver of an existing sanctions law not to impose sanctions on Iran. There's nothing legally binding about it. And if people vote for me, they know they are voting to get rid of that deal on the first day of my presidency. In fact, not only would we reimpose the current sanctions, I would ask Congress to increase those sanctions. And I would also ask, and I would also back up those sanctions with a credible threat of military force. A clear message to Iran: as long as you continue to enrich uranium or reprocess plutonium, we will sanction your economy. We will devastate it economically. And if you try to build a weapon, we will destroy your weapons program. I think oil and natural gas, in particular oil, is critical as well. Because if you think about the argument, the fact that Iran is still viable, even with the sanctions in place, it still sells oil, for example, to Japan. Well, if we are now allowed to export, it would allow us to go to our allies around the world and say, you no longer need to continue to buy your oil supply from a radical Shia cleric who wants to destroy the world. Instead, your energy supply for the foreseeable future can be from the most stable, prosperous, free society in all of human history, your strongest ally, the United States of America. So I do think the exports argument works closely on the issue of Iran as well.
Thank you for coming, Senator. As I'm sure you're aware, the oil industry in Oklahoma uses the H-1B visa system to a large extent. Will you stand up against those who would greatly diminish the amount of H-1B visas that are available?
Yeah, I've proposed that we need to reform that program to meet the realities of 21st century demand for labor. There's two things we need to do. First is we need to train more Americans to do the work. That's why I believe so strongly in vocational education. I joke to audiences, but it's not a joke, it's true. Welders make a lot more than Greek philosophers. And yet we probably produce too many philosophers out of our universities, but we're not training enough people to be welders. That's just one small-scale example. Some of the best jobs of the 21st century require more than traditional high school, but less than 4 years of college. And we just simply are not training enough people to do that work. And part of it is societally, we've stigmatized that work. We've told people that a 4-year degree person is smarter than someone who went to work with their hands. But number one, that isn't true. And number two, the people working with their hands may actually be able to find a job. And the Greek philosopher may be living in a tent in Australia trying to find themselves. So I think it's important for us to have a reform higher education system that allows people to find employment, but also is important for our economy. There will always be need in this country, depending on the industry, for seasonal labor from abroad. And I think the current program we have in place is too expensive, too bureaucratic, and quite frankly doesn't meet the requirements of what our economy may need from year to year. So I've talked about expanding that program, but also reforming it. And look, there are abuses in that program. I wouldn't say in the oil and gas industry, but in some other industries, there have been abuses of that program. And if some company is caught abusing the program, using it to hire, to replace Americans who are willing to do the work, they should be banned from continuing to use the program. But you shouldn't wipe out a program that's critical not just to energy, but to agriculture and to other industries, simply because someone is misusing it in the way it shouldn't be done. I would add one more point. If you're the smartest person in the world at what you do, we want you to come here permanently, not temporarily. We do it in sports. I promise you, if you're 6'9" and can dunk a basketball and can shoot 60%, you're not having a visa problem coming to the NBA. Well, why would we do that to why are we doing that to our economy? So I also believe that we need to reform our permanent legal immigration system. 1 million people a year are admitted to the United States legally. 1 million get a green card every year. There's no other country in the world that comes close to that number. But we're doing so primarily on the basis of whether or not you have a relative living here. My argument is that in the 21st century, our permanent immigration system must be built on merit, on what you can contribute economically, on what work you're going to do, what skills you have, what business are you going to open, what investment you're going to make. It needs to be primarily a merit-based system. And that has to be a cornerstone of any reform in immigration as well.
Other questions?
Yes, Senator, in my opinion, Saudi Arabia controls the price of oil by their production. They could drop their production and immediately raise the price of oil. And the rest of OPEC wants them to do that. So basically, they are the ones controlling the price of oil. And with their lifting costs being in the single digits and ours being $40 or $50, how are we ever going to have an investment in energy when nobody knows what's going to be the price of oil? We're dependent. We're foreign countries for what we can do.
Well, that's exactly why they're doing it. Their hope is that they can raise the price or lower the price on, and raise the costs on high-cost producers, and ultimately the investments will stop. Companies and others will go out of business, and then they have their share of the marketplace. It's a tactic they've used. Didn't just start using it last week. It's been going on for a while, and we need to be aware of it. And meaning aware of it, meaning we don't need to add additional costs to the industry. And in fact, we, at the federal level, need to be looking for ways to remove impediments to the American industry to try to get to the single digits ourselves. How? Again, by removing these unnecessary regulations, by opening up more lands and more things in the outer continental shelf and other places where we can do more exploration, by making it easy to transport energy, by reforming the tax code to make us globally competitive, by producing the quality workforce in our vocational programs and having immigration systems that work. All sorts of costs that are built in by the healthcare law. I mean, people that work in the energy industry have healthcare costs as well, in the cost of what you provide and how much it costs for you to operate and make an investment and hire more people. So it's a comprehensive approach, but at the end, our goal needs to be to increase capacity and do so, not through the government. The government doesn't have to do any of this. All the government has to do is create the environment where we become competitive in every sector, including energy. And if we do that, we have the reserves that even Saudi Arabia does not have. But many of those costs that you talk about in the double digits, while they're in the single digits, many of those are directly attributable to governmental action, governmental requirements, governmental regulations, and governmental impediments. And that's why it's important that we remove those, so we can compete head-to-head with them and anyone on the planet.
We've got time for one or two more questions, if there's some more.
Senator, I'm a physician, and just a couple of days ago, I was talking to one of my physician buddies who said something that kind of scared me. He said that the Affordable Care Act, after these Supreme Court decisions that we've had, it appears that it's here to stay, and that certainly concerns me a whole lot. And he's given up. What do you say to someone who says
Well, that's a choice we would make. I don't think it is here to stay if we don't want it to be. What you'll see in the years to come as premiums continue to climb in these exchanges is that less healthy people will sign up for them. And as a result, premiums will climb even higher. We have a health care law today that increases costs, lowers access, and encourages employers not to hire more people. So I think over time that's going to wear on the American people. And I think the best way to repeal it is to, at the same time as we repeal it, offer the American people what we would do to replace it. And what I argue is that we need to have a vibrant private market where every single individual American controls their own health care money, tax-free, whether it comes from your employer, your own money, or a tax credit, and you can use it to buy any health insurance you want, of the kind you want, from any company in any state in America that will sell it to you. That opens up now hundreds of millions of Americans, 100, 200 million Americans controlling their own health care spending. The private sector will respond to that by creating better products at a better price, the way they do now in auto insurance. And the result is more coverage at a lower price that makes sense for individual Americans. I think that's a better approach. I think it's one we can explain to the American people. I think it's one we're going to have to explain, one we're going to have the opportunity to explain to people as costs keep going up and coverage keeps going down and people keep getting bills in the mail for their high deductibles they didn't know they had when they signed up for Obamacare.
Okay, we got time for one more.
Senator Rubio, you made a statement that America is already great. Can you just expound upon that a little bit more? I'm very interested in hearing about
Yeah,
that.
well, thank you for asking. And I know that, there's another candidate running for president who likes to say he's going to make America great again. And I understand what he's trying to say. But I would remind everyone, there's no nation on earth I would trade places with. We have the most productive workers on the planet. We have the most innovative people on the planet. We've been blessed with extraordinary natural resources. We have a broken government, but it's still a great country. There's no nation on earth I would trade places with. If you just take everything about America and you stack it up with every other country in the world, ask yourself, who would you rather be? Who would you trade places with? There may be things about other countries you wish you had, but there's no nation I would trade places with. It's the reason why I have never seen a boatload of American refugees arriving on the shores of another country. And so the question is not that we're not a great country. We are a great country. The question is that the issue before us is we can be even greater. The question is not whether America's great. The question is, will we remain great? And will we fulfill our potential to be even greater than we've ever been? And that's why we need to act. That's why this election is so important. Because we have before us the extraordinary opportunity to usher in the most prosperous era in our entire history. And that's saying a lot for a country like our history. So it's important for us to remind ourselves of how great and blessed we are to be Americans. We have challenges ahead of us. We have some work to do. But so has every American generation before us. We've faced great challenges in our past. The Civil War was a great challenge. The Great Depression was a great challenge. So were 2 world wars. The 1960s were an era that felt like it was going to split the country in half. The Vietnam era was a great challenge. The Cold War was a great challenge. We even survived disco music in the 1970s. These are extraordinary challenges. But we confronted them and we overcame them. And now what we face is our turn. The time has come for this generation to do its part, to embrace the opportunities and confront the challenges. And if we do that, we are going to leave our children as the freest and most prosperous Americans that have ever lived. And if we fail, we'll be the first generation in American history to leave their children worse off than themselves. That's the choice. I know we'll make the right one.